Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Now in this video I'm going to be attempting to do a 100% guide for the Necropolis. Perhaps you've done your initial clear to get those great crypt rewards that are coming out on January 15th, and you're looking at a way to get through the rest of this content. I'm hoping that by providing this information, it will help people plan their teams and just kind of know what they're getting into. I have 100% it myself. I personally really love this content, and the way I'm going to be tackling this guide, instead of going path by path, we're basically going fight by fight. I'm going to talk about every single defender that you have to face, and essentially I'm rating them in two ways, which is going to kind of facilitate discussion on what you need to think about when you go through these specific fights. Note that some of the fights have different trap nodes, so I am going to try to address some of that as well. And then of course, things are always changing. There may be new counters coming out in the near future, but I'm mostly going to be talking from my own experience, having done the 100% in the past month or so, so it's all fresh in my mind pretty recently after the content itself was released. So let me explain the key and the rating system a little bit here. We are at first in the first column going to just rate the overall difficulty of the fight, like period. How hard is this fight? And then the second column, which I think is another aspect and another angle, is how necessary is a specific counter needed to this fight. So let me kind of explain the key a little bit. When it comes to the first column with difficulty, this assumes that you are going into the fight with a counter, whether it's like a perfect counter or a good counter. And essentially most fights are going to average out at orange, which by the way, I kind of went the way of like Peruvian chicken here with mild, medium, spicy, and extra hot. So this video is brought to you by Nando's Peri Peri chicken. No, just kidding. Anyway, so orange is sort of where it's going to average out. And, you know, if you have a decent counter, orange means you should be able to get it down relatively painlessly in a few revives. Like, take that for what it is with a grain of salt. A note about the idea of soloing fights and not soloing fights. I really do think that, you know, we shouldn't look at things as like, can I solo this fight? We should look at it more as like, is this a relatively not painful experience to get through the fight, have some decent tries, get it down in anywhere between like 0 and 4 revives. That to me is like a good fight in Necropolis. You shouldn't always be like, oh no, I didn't solo it, therefore it was bad. Like, you know when a fight is going well and when a fight is going bad, and that's kind of more about what I'm talking about here, not like, can I solo this fight? So red, spicy, this comes into play if there's some kind of big skill ask that, you know, the fight could go wrong like on a dime. If that's the case, it's probably going to be red. And also I did have to be a little subjective, and like if it's a little tricky to find a counter on a Necropolis team, this might also be a reason for it to be red. And then when it comes to dark red for extra hot, this means there's a real possibility of you just like starting the fight and dying almost immediately because of a little mistake and having to kind of unit man your way through the fight, even if you have a good team. So like the extra hot, there aren't that many fights that are that difficult, but there are a few where it's just like anything can go wrong and all of a sudden you've used like 10 revives and you feel like crap. That's sort of what extra hot means. Now in the second column, there's a little bit more nuance here about needing a counter. Now the yellow, mild, it basically means that almost any champ, as long as they have Necropolis reach with their damage, can do the fight. Orange is kind of like average, where it's like if there's one piece of utility to make the fight a little bit easier, it'll go better, but a counter's not necessarily needed. Red, spicy, means it's without a counter, it's going to be doable but pretty painful. And then dark red, extra hot, means this is potentially like a roadblock situation if you don't bring a counter, or you can get through it, but it's going to be extremely painful. So, you know, let's just take a look at one fight here where we look at Namor, right? Namor requires you to bring somebody that can do damage over time effects. Otherwise, you will not do any damage. So obviously, if you bring in somebody that doesn't do that, it will be a roadblock. And that's where we get the extra hot column in necessity for a counter. However, if you bring someone like Shuri, it's literally one of the easiest fights in Necropolis. So he gets a mild in that column. Obviously, if you try to use Aegon, it's not going to be very pretty there. And that mild in the overall difficulty column is not going to stand anymore. So hopefully that's a good example moving forward. We'll kind of go through all these fights and you'll see how this key works. Now, a few more things. Here are all the teams that I used, okay? Now, these ratings are largely from my experience, which were primarily using Kate Bishop and Shuri, also a decent amount of Guillotine 2099, Absorbing Man in America. I also brought Null, Wiccan, and Scorpion for a few fights. But aside from those big two, Kate and Shuri, we all know that Wong is a really, really popular main clearer. And I personally don't have experience with Wong, but I have a ton of respect for Wong in this content. He is like an absolute monster. So often when I say stuff like you will need a counter, I may even specifically be talking about one of those three champs, Wong, Kate, or Shuri, because not only do they have the damage, but they often have the correct utility you need as well. And then there are going to be some specific fights where I'm calling out these specific champs, these big three, basically saying like, if you do have this one champ, this becomes a mild fight. So it is important to know that in some cases, those big three are just like amazing counters. Next thing I want to talk about is Aegon. In my opinion, if you don't have 2 or 3 out of those 3 big 3 champs, then I don't feel super confident telling you to not use Aegon. Like, Aegon is a tried and true strategy for Necropolis. A lot of people are going to him, and I made another video about it before I did Necropolis, but basically, like, don't feel any shame about needing to use Aegon for the whole thing or for a specific path. Now, the thing I will say is that this guide is not necessarily about Aegon, it's about using other counters, but I will say that, you know, if you see dark red in the right column, it's probably going to be a tough fight for Aegon, and there are 2 fights that will absolutely roadblock him. There are possibly more, but I know for sure that Namor and Diablo, Aegon straight up cannot do, or there may be some crazy way to do it with like quitting out, but essentially those fights you do not want to use Aegon for. So that is the Aegon guide portion of this video. And then finally, before we get actually cooking here, I am aware this is going to be a long video. If this is your type of thing and you want to just sit down and listen to this whole thing, I really, really appreciate you. You're my favorite subscribers if you're just like willing to listen to me talk this whole time. I did want to keep this all in one video, so all the info is here in one click. However, because of that, I will be doing timestamps. So we have the introduction that I'm doing now. If you want to get straight away into the fights, I'm going to be dividing it into 4 sections. Essentially, think of like each little quadrant. I'm going to be going over those in each of 4 different sections, and then you can skip around. So if you don't want to see this all in one setting, I absolutely understand. You can come back, click on the next chapter, and go for it. So with that, let's get started with the rankings. Alright, so let's kick this thing off. The first fight on the first path is Sauron. There are a few things going on here. He is spicy for overall difficulty, and he's medium for necessity for a counter. Now, the reason that he is spicy, there is a lot going on, but it's essentially just a gigantic Sauron. He has a node that's going to be giving him more prowess, which means the unblockable is going to be happening more often. So that just makes him his base kit, but more annoying. And then also the trap node for this and for every subsequent fight on this path is that your medium attacks have a 50% chance to be evaded. So that means especially if you're punishing his specials, you have to be really, really careful. So there's evade, there's unblockable, and there's just the normal Sauron animations and immunities and stuff like that. That's why he gets a red. And when it comes to needing a counter, you can absolutely bring Nimrod for this one fight, but I just don't think many people are doing that because it's hard to fit Nimrod on an Necropolis team, in my opinion. And then another really good counter is Shuri with the dupe. She can block unblockable specials, so that means at least one aspect is taken care of here. I personally use Shuri, and This is a red fight because I did have to quit out and start many times before I got a good run. I feel like if this was in the middle of the map, it would definitely feel like a red fight more than it does as the first fight. Because you can keep going in and practicing, it makes the fight seem a little bit easier, but I really respect the difficulty of this fight and gave it a red. Now the second defender is Hitmonkey. He has that evade off of the medium as well, and he's also going to be getting both of his monkey schemes at random times, or at scheduled times, and that means he can purify debuffs and he can evade off of his base kit in addition to that medium. So this one I gave Spicy for necessity for a counter because you really want an evade counter here in my opinion. I personally use Kate Bishop. I just went straight to the cold snap, get the cold snap up, and you at least turn off one aspect of the fight, which is the evade, the trap node, and his personal evade. At that point, you just have to bait his special ones, punish his special ones, and be ready to have your parry stuns purified every once in a while. But this one I feel like is not that hard if you have an evade counter, which is why I gave it orange, but you do really want an evade counter. Next up, America Chavez. I originally had a Spicy, but in talking to a few people, I think extra hot is the way to go. Like I said in the guide, this is a fight where just like you can start it and then immediately die. She, again, I don't fully remember what her nodes are, but there's something about knocking her down will ramp her up with her dimensions. And basically any big America Chavez is going to be throwing heavies at you, unlocking her dimensions, potentially getting tons of power gain. She's also got the medium evade node, which doesn't make this easier. And then of course, if she gets to a special 2, she is very likely to have a negative zone open and to be unblockable and to just completely end your try. Now, I personally had a pretty good run against her, but I must have gotten the nicest AI in the history of MCOC because I've heard some horror stories about here just not being able to get the fight started and going. I've even heard of people bringing in counters for this. Like I know Spidey 99 and Quicksilver are good counters for America Chavez. I just don't know how well they are at reach in the Necropolis. So that's why I went for medium for needing to bring a counter, because it's really hard to fit a counter and I honestly can't think of many counters that will work here. So you're probably going to have to just use your Shuris or your Kate Bishops or whatever you have as your main clears. And because of that, overall difficulty, definitely extra hot. This is a very difficult fight. And unless if the AI is playing ball, it's going to be a pretty rough time. All right, so now we move to another path. I'm going to go over the unique fights first before the shared fights. And we have Mr. Fantastic. Now, I do think you really do want a counter. And now, if you have Baron Zemo, this becomes a mild fight. But because that is just one champion, I decided to make it a medium fight because there is a lot going on here. He's got a really high energy resistance, which hurts Kate, it hurts Shuri. And essentially, you not only need to alternate your specials so that you can, deal with the Mr. Fantastic careful study, but he puts careful studies on himself. This is the first fight we've seen where it's sort of like the attacker, the way you play the attacker is also the way they're defending, if that makes sense. So if he throws back-to-back specials of the same kind, he will get a massive energize, and then the fight just gets totally out of control. So we've got debuffs, we've got energy resistance, we've got him evading, and we've got energized potentially. This can become a really long slog of a fight if you don't bring a counter. That's why he got Spicy. But if you do bring Baron Zemo, and even Kate and Shuri, they can shut off some aspects of the fight. And Shuri, of course, can completely bypass the trap node, which is like you don't want to be hitting contact hits in the corner. Then you will have enough utility to be able to kind of nuke him down eventually. I just think where he lands, it is a relatively difficult fight, which is why he's medium. And having a counter to me feels pretty important. So that's why he is Spicy in that category. Next up, Namor, we already talked about. You need damage over time. That's why he is extra hot for necessity for a counter. But if you have that, Namor's actually pretty easy to fight, especially because when he gets into Imperious Rex, you don't have to worry about pushing him to 3 bars of power. You can just be really aggressive and he keeps draining power. That really plays in well to the way the enrage timer works. If you can be aggressive, throw specials while there's some kind of dot on him, then you're going to be able to extend the fight even longer. And he's just pretty easy to fight in general. So I didn't find this to be too difficult of a fight. We move on to Attuma. In my opinion, Attuma is one of the most difficult fights in this quadrant. First of all, there are so few counters to him in this Abyss node, this Necropolis node. Essentially, he has ways to like pause his hydration. So it's sort of just one of those fights where it's like Attuma's annoying enough and they gave him nodes to make him even more Attuma-like. And, you know, the problem is he gets to 19 hydration, he goes unstoppable. There's the physical thorns. So, like, you can try to use someone like Absorbing Man and use the physical resistance to bypass the thorns, but then you have to deal with the unstoppable. You can try to just counter the unstoppable, but then you have other problems. There's really not that many champions that dish out tons of shock and incinerate to deal with the hydration. So really what it comes down to is, do you have Shuri or not? And even with Shuri, this can be a difficult fight. You have to occasionally parry. You have to be able to land your untouchables with your heavies and know how that works. At times, he may have a lot of concussions because of the way that you're playing and using the parry. So there's a lot to go on even if you have Shuri. And I do think necessity for a counter is huge. This is another fight that Aegon is actually going to struggle with. And there just aren't a lot of counters. So it's almost Shuri or bust. And even with Shuri, it's difficult. That's why he is just very red and very dangerous. You got to respect this Attuma. It is not a fun fight. All right, so now we move on to the unique fights on the third path. Titania is sort of suffering from the same thing as Sauron, where like you can practice her so many times that people might underestimate how difficult she actually is. When you dash back a few times, she'll be putting weaknesses on you. Anytime she puts debuffs on you, she kind of ramps herself to get to that haymaker faster, and it just ramps her damage as well in case if you get hit. And also there's like a tranquilize passive here, so that if you parry, it's really hard to like have the parry stick after a while because of tranquilize. If you're trying to land debuffs, they're not going to land. So this is sort of like you need Kate Bishop. That's why it's spicy. I don't really know how to tackle this fight without Kate. I've seen Kate work so often here, and the only other thing I've seen really work is using it as an Aegon ramp-up fight and then just not caring. There's really not much else to do here. I would imagine somebody who can take care of debuffs, somebody who might be able to deal with unstoppable, like could do the fight, but this is kind of like you need Kate, and otherwise it's going to be fairly painful, so that's why it's spicy. If you do have Kate, you have the ability to practice this fight. I think it is only medium difficulty, but you do have to kind of respect those haymakers and the way Titania's animations are to push you all the way back to your wall. It's pretty tough. So like you could make an argument this is a spicy fight. I just think because you're able to practice it and get in there so many times, you can eventually get a really good run or a solo and then move forward. So that's Titania. When it comes to Aarkus, he is actually not that bad if you use Absorbing Man or America Chavez, in my opinion. I was able to get him down in, I think, 3 or 4 revives with America Chavez, and this is what I'm talking about. She absolutely shuts down everything about him, the power gain, and she has energy resistance. The only issue with America is that once you get to the enrage phase, like halfway through, he gets a huge fury essentially, and then his cold snaps do so much damage that it's really hard to like heal back, or you don't really heal, but it's hard for your energy resistance to stop that, and you're gonna die a lot faster. So she can't last the entire enrage period, but she can take off a good 25% per try. And then additionally, Absorbing Man is really good here. I know Wiccan can work really good here. They made this completely completely doom proof. You cannot doom cycle him. And also, if you're immune to stuff, then you are going to be kind of ramping him with passive power gains. So, you know, Wiccan is able to get rid of power gains on him, but you do need to be aware of this immunity ability that I just talked about. Absorbing Man just absolutely wrecks him, even though he is immune to armor break. The armor breaks are just ramping him. He's such a good Aarkus counter. So in my opinion, he is extra hot because without a counter, this is a huge mess of a fight. The cold snap, the power gain, it's just going to get out of hand without a counter and be very expensive. But if you do have one of those counters, it's actually not that bad of a fight. So we gave it a mild if you have a counter. Now, Omega Sentinel, this is the last of the unique fights. She is pretty spicy in terms of needing a counter. She's one of those 3-phase fights. Essentially, it's parry mastery active, so you can get auto-blocked and parried, which is very bad. You'll just get punished, you'll get incinerated. Eventually, she basically gets more armors and becomes armor break immune at times, which is very difficult. So I do highly recommend either somebody that removes armor or somebody who is immune to debuffs, right? Kate Bishop works here. If you have the Tranquilize up, you will not get parry stunned, you will not get incinerated. And I personally use Null for a lot of the fight. He's really good for the first 2 phases. And if you're on a roll, you can get pretty far into the 3rd phase. You just have to watch out for that armor break immunity. There are ways around it. He can still remove the armor and work. But you just have to be a little careful of that. And you also have to be careful of the bleed procs and the regen. You have to make sure Despair is blocking that. But Null is actually a really good counter here. And I will say there's one champion in the game who is the perfect counter to this fight, and that is Medusa. So if you can fit Medusa on your team, check out Kat Murdoch's YouTube channel, because she had nearly a solo. It was like one of those 99% fights and then just like a little slip up at the end. It is the best footage I've ever seen against this Omega Sentinel, and that's why like needing a counter is important. But if you have a counter, to me it's just a medium fight. It's not that bad. All right, so now we get to the 4 final fights, and there's a lot to say about these ones. Let's start with Airwalker. My personal experience with Airwalker was really positive, but I have an ascended Absorbing Man, and I did get a solo one time. I have a video of it on the channel, and I did get like a 1 revive try that just went really well. And then also I got a solo with Kate one time because her Tranquilize turns off the node. Airwalker doesn't have as much health as some of the other ones, so her cold snaps just absolutely melted him, kept him aggressive and throwing the special ones, blocking the special ones, having a great time. So I personally had a good time, but I've heard more horror stories about this Airwalker than almost any champ in section 1 of Necropolis. So he does get this spicy followed by extra hot rating here, which I think he deserves. The problem is if you die a couple times, if he gets 2 or 3 of his persistent charges, he is just going to be gaining so much power. Things are going to get absolutely out of hand. You have to be knocking him down constantly. You have to worry about stuff like the Dark Tide and the power gain as it is. If you're not able to knock him down, he goes unstoppable. He regens a ton. It's just a bad time. If he gets to a special 3, you're dead anyway. And you know, his special 1, it has a weird spacing. It's not always easy to punish. The special 2 is very easy to punish, so sometimes you want to push him there. That's all to say, he's a very dangerous guy. If you bring in Absorbing Man or Kate and they're like ascended rank, you want to just try to get that solo, man. I know I said earlier, like, don't think about the solos. This is a fight where if it's going poorly, just force quit, because you don't want to give him that charge and have to start all over. You do want to get some really good tries on your first and second try and just try to nuke him down with one of those champions. You got to respect this fight. I think with Attuma, it is the equal to the hardest fight in this area just because of how bad things can go wrong. Now, the next 3 fights, if you have Shuri on all 3 paths, I think they become mild. She is so good for the next 3 fights. However, not everyone has her, so I did try to give these ratings that I thought were accurate. Captain Britain has a node where if she purifies your debuffs, which happens essentially when you crit, you get a debuff on you, and then she throws a special, she purifies them based on her kit, then you get a period of reverse controls. This all depends how much you want to counter that by using a champ like Guillotine 2099 or Shuri, who can do 0 crits, or even Guardian or someone like that I think could work here. If you bring in a 0 crit champion, then you pretty much don't have to worry about the node at all, and she's quite easy. So I did give it spicy for needing a counter, because I do think that's worth bringing in if you can. All those reverse controls and her specials kind of hitting like a truck into block, that's bad. So bringing a counter is good, and then it becomes kind of just like a regular medium fight. In my opinion, Shuri is a mild fight. I was able to get some really, really good tries against her, but with anyone else, it's sort of orange for me. However, if you don't have a counter, you have to play around the node, and then I think these two columns swap, where it becomes like medium for needing a counter, but then it becomes a red spicy fight. So that's Captain Britain. In terms of Wiccan, I think you really, really want a counter here. Not only will you get incinerated at times, so you need to watch out for that, but if you have any amount of energy damage, or even not energy damage, his special ones are going to heal back a ton, especially of its energy. So if you're using Kate Bishop, you need America Chavez, because you need those extra debuffs to get the full despair going, because all of your cold snap will get reversed. Same thing with Shuri, you need the despair mastery. The benefit of Shuri is that she actually will not be getting neutralized. I think it's because of her ability accuracy that can't be modified, but it's also she doesn't get the precisions from the dexterity, so she's kind of like double covered here. And she is great because she can just despair heal block him the whole time. And I've also heard of bringing in some science champions. One of my buddies, Chip, who is in my alliance, used Cassie Lang, ascended Cassie, and got a solo of Wiccan. So there are definitely counters to him, and I think he is a pretty straightforward fight. The node is just like, don't live in the same bar of power as him for too long. That's basically what the node is, which as long as you're like able to throw your specials, it's pretty easy to not live in that same zone for too long. So I do think he's a pretty easy fight, but you do need to respect he's extra hot for necessity for a counter. This is potentially a place that you can get roadblocked because of that regen if you don't plan accordingly. So do really think about that. And then when it comes to Psycho Man, he's a little bit of a weird fight. Again, Shuri makes him mild because she's immune to concussion, so he's never going to reduce your abilities. But this is sort of like a mini game fight. There are little prompts that you need to be fulfilling in time, otherwise bad stuff happens. Otherwise, his special 1 is very easy to evade. His special 2 takes some practice, so that's something to consider, maybe practicing the special 2 decks. But essentially just keep doing the prompts. It's a long fight, it's a little bit of an annoying fight, but to me it's kind of like an average Necropolis fight. It's just orange across the line. If you bring Shuri, it's a lot easier. That's why it's medium for necessity for a counter. Even if you have her or if you don't have her, it kind of comes down to medium. A little bit has to do with RNG and the prompts that you're getting when, but overall, it's not that bad of a fight. Just don't really expect to solo it, because there are some interesting factors that can go wrong as well. So that's the end of section 1. Let's move on to section 2. Alright, so the next section of the map we're going to talk about is the one that starts with Jubilee. This is sort of the bottom right, so we're taking care of section 1 of both areas first. And this one, in my opinion, is substantially harder. Now, it doesn't necessarily reflect in the amount of red and dark red that you see, but I will just tell you that there's a lot more skill ask in general on this side and a lot more specific counters needed. Now, Jubilee has a node where she fires off one of her fireworks, and it'll tell you have to use a specific attack, whether it's medium, light, or heavy. And if you don't do what it says, she will get like a massive energize. So this becomes a little bit of a problem, and really the best counter for her is Guillotine 2099. Like, if you have Guillotine 2099, you can basically it's pretty easy, in my opinion, to do this in 1 revive, even if you're not playing perfectly. And I would expect to do 1 revive, because the way you play is essentially like special 1 spam, so it is a little tricky to get the special 3 to capture the soul at the end if you're like totally going for it toward the end. So expect to die once and then go back in and capture the soul. That's what I did. And just in my opinion, if you have a ranked Guillotine 2099, it's worth going into this fight until you have a really good run and you can capture the soul with 1 revive, because Guillotine 2099 is going to be valuable for the rest of this path. So I think because of the nature of that, it is a mild fight because you can just keep going back in and trying, and Guillotine 2099 is so good. If you don't have her, Dr. Doom can certainly work, or somebody else who doesn't crit will help. Someone with power gain will help. I bet future Ant-Man would work for this fight as well due to the way he has power control, but essentially anyone can do it if you follow the node. I just do think you do want some kind of power control, otherwise it can be a kind of a cumbersome fight. But this is where she lands. Again, kind of suffering from the first fight on the path syndrome. That's why she's mild in my opinion, but I do think Guillotine 2099 such a good counter, and you do want her if you have her. Now, I-Bomb, the reason he's extra hot for needing a counter is simply because of the poison. Like, you need either poison immune or tranquilize in the case of Kate Bishop or something like that. The issue is if you are poison immune, then there is a chance that you will ramp him up enough so that he goes into acid burn anyway. So this is a doable fight with Guillotine 2099 if you already have her ramped up. Now, she is poison immune. What you want to actually do is push him to his special 2 and then bait the special 2, because if he does the special 1s, he's going to keep gaining poisons, and that's when he gets this acid burn from the Necropolis node. Now, Kate absolutely takes care of him because she has tranquilize. You'll take a little bit of chip damage at the start of the fight, but then it just becomes a regular tranquilize followed by cold snap fight. Obviously, this is a good Aegon fight because of the shrug as well. So if you are going the Aegon route, you'll be absolutely fine. I should just mention that. But there's not that many counters here. If you bring poison immune, you have to bait special 2s. Extra hot for needing a counter. But if you do have a counter, he's not that bad. Now, next up is Diablo. Diablo is kind of hard, but he is more all this red because of just, you need to respect the fight that it could roadblock you, because his specials will regen him so much. And now this is sort of like the Psycho Man fight where there's like a mini game going on. If I understand correctly, the mini game is actually sort of the way you used to play Diablo before his buff. You have to ready certain vials of your potions based on prompts that you see, and then you have to like end there, do a medium ending combo to activate the potion, and then dash back to drink the potion. It's pretty silly, but I kind of liked it. Like I said, it's a mini game type fight. That's all going on, plus the regen. So there is a pretty decent skill ask in this fight. Otherwise, you're going to just like deteriorate your health by missing the prompts. You take huge direct damage. If you're not doing the prompts, you're going to die fast. That's why it's a spicy fight in general. And you do absolutely need a counter because of that healing. So champs like Shuri, I always bring her up, but she can block the healing outright. Champs like Void and Sandman can reverse the healing and have a wonderful time. Human Torch works really well here. And if you have a Guillotine 2099 ramped up, she will also work. If you do special 2s, you'll be doing a ton of damage. You'll be reversing the healing with the special 2s. It's a difficult fight with her, and if you lose your ramp, then it's a lot harder going in the second try. However, she does work quite well. Next up is Red Goblin, and these next 3 fights have an asterisk because the fights themselves don't need specific counters. In fact, they all are fights that I think anyone can do. The only big difference is that there's a trap node here that has a power detonate if there's not a damage over time effect on the champion. And that is massive because these power detonates will just wreck you. So this is really where somebody like Kate and Shuri, again, they are so OP where they come into play here because they have such easy access to consistent damage over time that they will basically have like 1 power detonate maybe show up if you're Kate, and then it's turned off for the rest of the fight. So you have to basically use a dot champion. It can be passive or active dot. And then when it comes to these fights, I'm just going to kind of talk about the fights themselves, but the reason they're red is because of the power detonate. Red Goblin is a pretty easy fight. He basically has a way to basically, I don't even remember what the node is. I think it was something about either energize or the opposite of energize for your combat power. I just remember it not being bad at all. So yeah, I like the fact that I forgot the node shows that like it's really not that bad of a fight. With Kraven, the issue is he sets a trap with a special 2 and he sets a trap with a special 1, and they can both be on the field at the same time. So you want to kind of like dash out of the special 2 really far away, get that trap far away, and then just make sure if you're doing a special 1 that you throw a special into it. It feels a little bit like Citalis, but there's going to be times where there's like traps in front of you and behind you, and it gets really difficult. So watch out for that Kraven. He's not necessarily easy. So that's why he is also spicy in the difficulty category, because you're just gonna die at times. I've seen Stryfe work really well for this fight, just because if Stryfe is already ramped, he's gonna be doing so much damage. But yeah, if you're using sort of a conventional clearing champ, it's not gonna be that fun, and it's a pretty difficult fight. Now Nimrod, I don't really think his nodes are that bad. It's just essentially a big Nimrod. He's going to go into Eradicate protocol more often, which means, you know, unblockable specials and all the effects. If you get hit, it's going to hurt. He'll be getting energized more often, things like that. It's one of those 3-phase fights, but you don't really need a specific counter, in my opinion. I do think Kate Bishop will struggle here, though, because of the unstoppable after his specials. It's going to make it hard to knock him down and to keep all your stuff going. Shuri, however, has no issues, and I have a feeling that you're not going to want to use Wong because of the power detonate node. So this really comes down to becoming a pretty difficult fight without Shuri, but if you have her, it's kind of an orange fight. It's not that bad at all. And then finally, we get to the final 3 of the unique fights. We have Odin. Odin, really, any champ works. I've seen solos with so many champs on this fight. It is sort of a gimmick fight in that you have the ability to tank heavy attacks, which are going to put buffs on him. I have a video of America Chavez soloing it where I go over the strategy, so I'm not going to go into it in this video, but essentially there's a way to build him up very safely and then keep those buffs up for the entire time, and it's sort of like reverse buffed up. As long as he has buffs, I think it's 6 buffs on him, then you can do damage. And then there's a reverse controls type node that you have to deal with that's very difficult, in my opinion. So he is you know what, I may even change him to red, but I'm keeping it at orange, mostly because he is like the first fight, so you can go in and practice it a ton, and once you get the strategy down, it's not that bad. But when it comes to needing a counter, I do think that literally anyone can do him, so that's why he's yellow there. It's a tricky fight, but you have a lot of chance to practice it. That's why he's orange followed by yellow. Now Black Widow Clairvoyant, I've heard some people have a lot of success against her. I personally had a lot of problems with this fight. I did bring in Scorpion, which was a little bit of a mistake in my opinion. I tried to use him because he can block unblockable specials. Essentially, you have to control this thermostat with this Black Widow Clairvoyant, where if she gets to 0 charges or if she gets to 20 of her Claire charges, which, you know, it'll go in either direction if you're immune to something or if you are like getting nullified, and there's ways in the fight for that to be happening constantly, essentially. So like those things are happening. She's just going to go fully unblockable. And also when she's unblockable, she can one-shot you. She's got like a death touch. So the fact that she has a death touch, and it's literally at times one mistake, an unblockable hit will just end your run. She is extra hot to me. It takes a lot of skill to get her down. And the reason she's orange in the needs a counter is because I thought I brought a counter and it actually wasn't that helpful. I had better tries with Kate Bishop, And with even Guillotine 2099, because in general, if you're controlling power, then she's not throwing specials, she's not getting the buff immunity, she's not, it's easier to control her thermostat if you just control the match with power control. So Guillotine 2099 actually wasn't that bad. Bringing a specific science champion against her, the only one that I would really recommend is Overseer with the Hulk synergy, because he obviously can't be nullified and that will deal with the reverse controls. So if you have him, it's definitely not an extra hot fight, but I think most people aren't going to be able to fit that in. It's a really difficult champ, like 2-champ combo to fit in on a team, and I do think she is one of the hardest fights that you're going to have to deal with here, and there aren't that many counters. Shang Chi is deceptively hard. He's another fight where you have to do his offensive thing defensively. You basically need to like do his wushu strikes, and then it readies and unreadies them on himself, and as he needs to have chi charges, otherwise when he throws specials he will do direct damage to you. It's a complicated fight, so he gets the spicy for how difficult it is. And again, there's not really a need for a counter here. There's not really anything that you can do except for maybe power control so that he's never throwing specials. That's really the only kind of counter to him, and things get a little rough in the final phase because your heavy attacks will no longer ready the wushu strikes again. So you actually have to perform all 4 of the wushu strikes, and then you become stun immune, I guess. I used Guillotine 2099 for most of it, so I didn't have to play around with all this, but you become stun immune so that then you basically don't get stunned by the stunning wushu, and then you start the process all over again. It's a pretty complicated fight, and if you're just kind of like going YOLO, you're gonna die a lot. So I do think it's a pretty difficult one, and it's got the reverse controls on top of it. So Black Widow followed by Shang-Chi is not an easy combo. In general, you might find that this Odin path is the most difficult one to get through. All right, so now we get to the shared fights here. There is a note here that all of these become sort of like extra hot or spicy when it comes to needing somebody for the power detonate trap node. Those will absolutely require a counter. That is only 1 out of the 3 times that you do these fights though, so I'm going to talk about them without that in mind. Just know if you're doing that path, it's one of the only trap nodes that absolutely needs a counter, otherwise you're just going to get power detonated to death. So Squirrel Girl, you have to watch out. Basically, once the squirrel comes back on you automatically by this node, then you start building ruptures, which is a bad time. So the strategy is basically knock her down. As soon as the squirrel comes back on you, you want to put the squirrel on her. So you just have to time your knockdowns. The Tranquilize did not stick when I was using Kate Bishop. I think she's got some kind of debuff shrug. So I used Kate Bishop and I basically just did Cold Snap all the way. And the other thing is you cannot heavy attack her while stunned, which makes knocking her down more difficult. So this became a fight where I really had to work on spacing, block part of her special one, retaliate with my heavy attack, and it became a really fun and sort of skill intensive fight. I might consider changing this one to spicy because there was a big skill ask there, but you don't have to use Kate Bishop. I think Shuri's a little bit more safe here, and again, with almost any champ, it's not that bad. You just need to make sure that you have some special ready to knock her down right on time anytime the squirrel is on you, otherwise you will get ruptured, and then that leads to more direct damage later. So that's the way to play the fight. To me, it's sort of a pretty average fight, so that's why it's double orange. Silver Centurion was really hard to grade because he's not extra hot for needing a counter, but he's pretty much one breath away from being extra hot to needing a counter. I think in general, if you're bringing Doctor Doom or Guillotine 2099 or Hulkbuster, those 3 champs can rinse this guy because it's just power control. You basically never let him throw a special and just like onslaught of damage into him, and then the node goes away. The node basically will give him like a power efficiency where I think if it's, what is the mechanic? If he's locked on or something, then he will not drain power. So the way to play around that is to like bait special 2s and allow the locked on to sort of naturally fall off. It sounds really difficult to me, so I was almost ready to make this extra hot for needing a counter, but because there is a way to play around it, which takes a lot of skill, I only left it as red for needing a counter. But now let's assume you have a counter. It's sort of just an orange fight. Like with Guillotine 2099, if you're really good at like holding block, baiting heavies, not letting him throw specials, always having your special one ready to go and power drain, or if you're just doom cycling him, it's actually a pretty straightforward power control fight. Hulkbuster also works really well. You can just like constantly prevent him from ever throwing a special, just like Guillotine 2099. So again, tough fight to rate, but that's kind of where I ended up, is orange followed by red. Spidey 99 is pretty tricky. Let's just talk about the fight itself. It's another one where you have to kind of play as him. If you dex, it gets rid of a wither that is on you, and you got to get rid of that thing, because the wither means anytime you block, you get ruptures on you. When you have ruptures on you, it means if you go over a bar of power, you take a sting of damage. On one of the paths, I did use Scorpion here because he is rupture immune, and it actually really helped. But another really good strategy is Kate Bishop using the Tranquilize. It just gets rid of the wither, and that's one whole aspect of the fight out of the way. The other aspect is that he's going to get power gain passives that stack, and you need to block, otherwise those will stack. But if you take a blocked hit, then it will go away. But you also need to be careful not to block too much when the wither is up, otherwise you will gain ruptures, as I talked about. So for me, especially when there's trap nodes on this, like the reverse controls and the wither and the power gain, it makes for a pretty difficult fight in my opinion. So I do think you want a counter, whether it's, you know, it's the rupture immune or the getting rid of the debuffs or power control or something. You do want some kind of counter here, so that's why it's spicy. And even with a counter, it's a pretty tough fight, so don't underestimate this fight. It is double red in my opinion, and I had a really bad time against him with also the reverse controls. I think it was just one thing too many. There was too much to keep track of, and I just kept dying. So very difficult fight. He's double red for a reason. Just watch out for that Spidey 99. Now Sunspot is a pretty easy fight in contrast. He gets sort of like Human Torch's Nova Flame at times, which essentially, like, when he goes into that mode, you don't want to hit him. You're not going to get Nova Flame, but you will get these power stings on you. They're like no damage Nova Flames, but if you are really aggressive and hitting into him during this phase, then you're actually going to get like 1,000,000 power stings on you, which will instantly kill you, and then you have to sit around, dance around, and wait for them to fall off. So the strategy is either use Guillotine 2099 basic hits only and never throw specials. If she's ramped, it's great. You can also throw some special ones when you're not in that crazy mode, but that works really well. Or basically like any champion is fine. You just have to be careful and be passive during that thing, or just don't throw specials. Overall, because his animations are so easy to dodge and there's not a lot going on in the fight, unless if you accidentally power sting yourself, I think this is a pretty easy fight. It's why we gave it mild. And in terms of needing a counter, like I said, Guillotine 2099 is great for it, but it's only orange in terms of needing her or not. It'll make your life easier, but it's not necessary. All right, so that's the end of section 2. Let's move on to the third of 4 sections. So now we're back on the left side of the map, and this is the section 2 of that. As we get going, Silver Surfer is a pretty standard fight. Essentially, the node is going to be giving tiny debuffs to him, and 2 of them happen to be Incinerate, and I don't remember if it's Shock or Cold Snap, but it's one of the ones that ramps him, that acts as a buff on him. And basically when he has more buffs or those debuffs on him, it's more likely that he's going to be unblockable with his specials, and if you get hit, it's more red damage. That only matters because of the trap node. The trap node is if you throw a special for 8 seconds, I believe, you get this passive on you, which will not allow you to dex or evade specials. So that means if it's unblockable, if you're too close, you can get clipped by it. It also means muscle memory. When he throws a special one, it's going to be so hard to not dex back and just to block it. Now, if you do bring a counter, he doesn't really need it, but Absorbing Man absolutely rinses him. You're going to be ramping with all of those armor breaks, and you also have the ability to regen if you make mistakes, and you've also got resistances so that, you know, when you're taking hits into block, it doesn't hurt that badly. Absorbing Man makes this fight an absolute dream. Even if you don't bring a counter, it's not that bad. It's pretty vanilla. That's why he is rated as he is. Misty Knight is basically, there's a way for her two things. I forgot what they're called. There's one that's for like evasion, and there's one for purifying debuffs. There's a way that basically, I don't fully understand her kit, but they're more likely to be in equilibrium, which means more likely to get her unblockable and her guaranteed crits and things like that. And then when you consider the fact that she can evade at any moment, she can purify debuffs at any moment, and she can also get the trap node, which is that you cannot evade her unblockable specials, you're going to want to bring a counter for one aspect of this fight. So duped Shuri, really good. You can just block the specials and barely take any damage. Or Kate Bishop, Cold Snap, it gets rid of the evade. It makes it so you can be a little bit more careful, throw your special one when she doesn't have power, and then push her over a bar of power so that you can evade the special one. It's a special that is worth practicing the evade. It's not automatic when it's unblockable, so do practice that. My suggestion is bring a counter for one of those aspects, either the unblockable specials themselves or the evade. If you handle one of those, she's not that bad and she becomes an orange fight. That easily swaps to be a spicy fight if you don't have a counter though, so be careful. Storm Pyramid X is not that bad if you have a counter. The ones I've heard that work are Guillotine 2099, OG Iron Man, and I personally used Future Ant-Man. This was my one Future Ant-Man fight. I do have a video of it on my channel. It was a pretty solid 2 revive effort. It made it seem really simple. It's just a big Storm Pyramid X. They give her more prowess. She's more likely to be unblockable. And similar to Misty Knight, the unblockable is a bit of a problem because you cannot always dex the specials. So having somebody with some form of power control, but also can, you know, not throw a special and then have to immediately bait a special that's unblockable, that's who you want. That's why the champions I just mentioned work, you know, removing the prowess with OG Iron Man, or in the case of Future Ant-Man, just sort of having the glancing up, that which will help, and not allowing her to use a lot of specials the way he always does, and really good burst damage, or Guillotine 2099 just doing Guillotine 2099 things. This is a fight you need to plan for. Aegon can nuke it down with just basic hits, but it will not be pretty. So do respect the fight, but if you do bring a counter, it's actually not that bad. Now the next 3 fights are a little special because they have a node that basically when they dash toward you, you get an indestructible buff. Now there are 2 champions in the game that can really exploit that. The first one is Wong, and the second one is Absorbing Man. They both sort of get ramped by buffs in that way for their own reasons. So from what I've heard, again, I'm not experienced with Wong, is if you have Wong for these 3 fights, and honestly for the whole rest of the path, almost everything becomes mild. He absolutely destroys this, and there's a lot of things that he destroys in Necropolis, but particularly this side of the map with this trap node, he is the GOAT. So if you have him, these all become yellow, in my opinion. I just wanted to, since that's so centric on one champion, kind of just make everything a little bit of an average and make it orange. Now Apocalypse, his node itself isn't that bad. It's just sort of like you have to look at your combos, otherwise he's going to keep getting genetic code. When he gets the high amount of genetic code, it's more prowess, his specials hurt more, and he can also stun you with his light attack. So it's just a big fat Apocalypse. It's not that bad, but you throw on how much health he has, how tanky he is, the fact that you can't really dex his specials that easily, except for the special 2 if you practice it, and also the indestructible at times. It's just an annoying fight. So without Wong, it's kind of just orange all the way. You could consider these next 3 fights to be kind of spicy without Wong as well. It just kind of depends on your skill level and how comfortable you are with the defenders. Now Tigra, the one thing that I remember about this fight is that light attacks have a chance to miss when she has her blue sense up, which she has right at the beginning of the fight. And let me tell you, Kate Bishop, when you do a riposte stun, that counts as a light attack. So there were times I would riposte and it would just absolutely miss and I would die immediately. That was terrible. So we went to Absorbing Man for me, who exploited that indestructible, and she went down. It's a pretty annoying fight, but one that you can get better at, especially if you're knowing how to do spacing and outrange her special 2 and not get clipped by an unblockable special 2. You should be fine. Hercules was pretty annoying. I would easily give him spicy in terms of difficulty if the existence of Wong and Absorbing Man weren't here. If you have them, it's going to be fine. If you use anyone else, this is going to be a super annoying fight. Not only does he have the indestructible, he gets protection pretty often throughout the fight, and you have to basically get feats of strength, like do a heavy attack outside of stun or intercept him to remove the protection, and it gets more and more annoying as the fight goes on. It just essentially gives him like a lot more effective health, because between the indestructibles and the protections, it's just really annoying. You throw on top of that he has Infuriate. Some of your abilities are going to fail, and Infuriate is just infuriating at times. So if you don't like Herc, you're gonna really hate this fight, especially. But it was a little bit of a slog. It's just, again, because Wong exists, he's only orange. Bring Wong, just have a better time with it. However, it is a pretty annoying fight if you don't have him. So that's the caveat of those 3 fights. Now, Guardian, he's getting extra armors. He, as it is going to be auto-blocking your special attacks with almost any champion that you have. Therefore, I highly recommend bringing a counter, somebody with either unblockable specials or true accuracy. I personally used Null and had an amazing sort of 1 revive take of this guy. And I do have a video of the near solo of him on the 2nd try. We took him down like 90% of his health in 1 try. It was an absolute feast for Null. When you gain those extra armor up buffs, you just continue to stack your armor breaks and your Living Abyss if he's corrupted. It was a really, really great time. I've heard Vox works really well, as does Gore, because they have the Undermine, which is essentially a way to get around auto block. You just want a counter. I don't think brute forcing with a normal champ is that good. He also has energy resistance, which will hurt champs like Kate Bishop and Shuri, who are primarily energy damage. So if you're doing this path, I also heard that Adam Warlock works because of the unblockable. I think you want to bring a cosmic champ specifically for Guardian, but if you do, he's a bit of a walk in the park. He's not that bad. Valkyrie, on the other hand, she's one of those fights that is a very difficult play around node, but you don't need a specific RPG counter. You just have to play really well. So that's why she is yellow for needing a counter, but she is red for difficulty of the fight itself. Read the node. Essentially, you have to get a passive pierce going by doing various things that the nodes ask you, and then by doing that, she won't get this like crazy power efficiency, but she's just a little tricky to fight in this matchup. I remember it going south for various reasons. That was my first path, so I don't remember it that well, but I do know like this is a fight you want to study, practice, and read a little bit, because there's going to be times where she can just like corner you, always have specials if you're not doing things right, and if you start taking blocked special hits, it's going to really hurt. So she doesn't seem that bad on paper, but respect this fight. I gave it a red for a reason. Red Guardian is one of the easiest fights in the whole thing. Now, if you do have Tranquilize or some way to deal with the stun debuffs, then it's basically no node. So, Aegon absolutely rinses him, of course, but like Kate Bishop, if you get the Tranquilize up, the entire node is turned off and he just becomes like a complete dud. But even if you don't have that, the way to play around it is to throw your special attacks as his shield is coming down so that you don't get stunned. and it just takes a little bit of practice timing your specials at various times, but you will potentially heal, not if you're a skill champion, but the slow debuffs will heal you, and his animations are just so easy, and there's only one thing in the fight that can go wrong. If you play around that one thing, you're absolutely fine. He's double yellow, in my opinion, one of the easiest fights in the whole thing. A number of counters work. Don't worry about him too much. Captain Sam is going to be giving you extra ruptures, and kind of like Guardian, he's got the issue where it's pretty often that you're just going to have your specials auto blocked. So if you have a champion that needs to land specials, it's a bit of a problem. Kate Bishop has true accuracy on her specials, so they will land. That's good to know. You can also use armor removal options. So, again, Medusa, Null, Vox, champions like that who can get through the unblockable specials with Undermine or removing the armors are going to have a pretty good time. Because he's a champion that you want to bait the special 1, it does take a certain rhythm to this fight. Blocking special 2s is going to be really bad in this fight. So essentially, Kate Bishop is great. She is one of the best counters for this fight. There are other cosmic champions that can take him. I do think he's red for bringing a counter, but if you do have a counter, he's just sort of medium difficult. If you do push him to a special 2, things are going to go bad, but if you can get in a rhythm of baiting the special 1, it's not that bad. Next up, we have Dragon Man. And Dragon Man, I do think you want a counter. However, I almost gave him orange for needing a counter because his big issue is if you crit too many times, then he goes stun immune, and it's just a big Dragon Man with power gain and inability to stun. It's really easy to get cornered. It's really easy to send him red when he has like 8 million health. That's basically the bottom line here. So if you do have Guillotine 2099, if you do have Shuri, you can completely bypass the node, and then it just becomes a regular Dragon Man. So that's why he's red for needing a counter. If you have one of those no crit options and they fit on your team, it's going to be a lot easier, and then he's not that bad. I guess you could also use power control, like America Chavez might work here, but overall, it wasn't that bad of a fight. But I do think if you just kind of go in and don't respect the stun immunity, there's going to be a time in the fight where you can't bait a special, he goes red, and the try ends. That's why he's red for needing a counter. Now, Captain America Infinity War, pretty similar to Red Guardian. There's almost nothing going on in this fight. Almost anyone can take him. He's got really easy animations. The only true issue here is that there are various things that can lead to you getting a concussion. And when you have a concussion, not only will your abilities potentially fail, you may not be able to stick a parry. Obviously, if you tank a special 2, you're probably going to die. Otherwise, there's not really much going on here. It is sort of a breath of fresh air toward the end of Necropolis when you do this fight because it is pretty straightforward. If you do have Kate Bishop, again, tranquilize. It just turns the whole thing off. You will never get concussed. You will never get any of the other debuffs related to this node. He's got really easy to punish animations, and he's a total walk in the park. So again, breath of fresh air, double yellow, Captain America Infinity War, not that bad. Nova, it really comes down to how comfortable are you baiting his special attacks. If you have them both down, there's not too much going on in this fight. He does have a thing where you don't want to be too close to him for too long because bad things will happen, but the bad things that happen are not that bad. This is mostly just a giant Nova. Somebody like Kate can absolutely take him. And then also Absorbing Man just happens to be really good for him in general. I think you want Magma Form here, if I remember, and it's okay to throw the unblockable Magma specials, because even though those themselves don't do that much damage and they kind of ramp him due to his ability for unblockable specials and such, you get the damage on the basic hits right after. I think you can even do this in Uru and it'll be fine. Just spam the special ones and then keep refining, and your basic hits are just going to be doing a ton of damage. I don't think you have to be fancy and go to the special 3. So for me, every time I got here, it was Carl, it was Kate, it was a few revives. It wasn't that bad. To me, it just felt like a double orange fight. Kind of average run-of-the-mill Necropolis fight. It wasn't that bad, and then you move on to the Grandmaster. So we've got one more section to cover, in my opinion, the hardest section. So let's take this one as we go. So now we get to the part where most people absolutely dread, which is the second half of the right side. And you can see there's a lot more red. There's a few dark red here. There's some very difficult fights. So let's get into it. Stryfe is just really hard, and bringing a counter that can deal with either miss or unstoppable will help, or someone like Quicksilver that can deal with both. But there's sort of no way to turn off both of the aspects and get enough damage to get him down. So he is arguably extra hot for both, but he's definitely spicy for both. And depending on how well you play, it sort of depends on how hard the fight is. He gets, first of all, there's an untouchable node where if you don't finish a combo 5 hits after you start a combo, you get untouchable, which is just straight up miss. So having a miss counter is going to help, of course. But then he has his own timer, which will either put an unstoppable on you or him, or an untouchable on you or him. And you're like, oh great, I have an unstoppable on me. No, that's not great, because he can stun you through contact if you are unstoppable. And then obviously if he's unstoppable, it's really hard to hit him. And then also, if either of you miss, it's going to ramp his telepathic charges as well. So you might think, oh great, I'm untouchable now, but that's also bad, because then he will get over 5, you will glance, you will potentially have him miss again. It's just a bad cycle of events. So I personally used mostly Shuri, but I ended up kind of team reviving here, because Kate can turn off the miss, Shuri can just sort of be passive and do damage, and then Guillotine 2099 wasn't awful because she had power control, but it did take a bunch of revives. It is a very difficult fight. You can try bringing a counter, but this to me is a typical double red fight. You can try your best to bring a counter. Even if you bring a counter, it's hard. If you don't bring a counter, it's hard. It's just a hard fight. Double red. That's how we start. Next up is Spot, and he has the same trap node where he gets extra untouchable, plus all the normal Spot stuff that you have to deal with, and him going untouchable. If you prevent the miss, you will get ruptured, but not the miss from the trap node, only his personal miss. So that's something you also have to keep track of. And then additionally, occasionally he gets an energize. So if you're trying to be really aggressive, you can accidentally take him from yellow to red in no time. So you do really want to counter here. I think Baron Zemo's okay. Kate was great. You can try to do tranquilize, but I actually just fought Spot like I would in Alliance War, just like regular Spot techniques, and just went straight to cold snap, because I knew one mistake and I was dying. I would rather just get the damage cooking early. So I used Kate, I built cold snaps, I tried to just play Spot like I know how to play Spot, watch out for the untouchable, know that we have the tracking to deal with some of the untouchables, be careful of the ruptures. It's a lot to keep track of. That's why he's double red. Next up is Galan. Galan absolutely needs a counter. Now I heard Aegon can brute force him. You may be able to brute force him, but he's another one of those 3-phase fights where they do everything they can to make him ramp up and harvest you ASAP. And as you know, most mystics don't deal with his buffs, but neutralize does. And I think Wong can also do this fight. It's a good fight for Wong. It's a good fight for Wiccan. Those are kind of the only options that I know of personally. I used Wiccan and it went really well. You can completely keep the spells up, you can regen a little bit. The only issue is in the 3rd phase, he gains increased ability accuracy, so your neutralize doesn't have the 100% efficacy anymore. And because of that, some buffs will get through and you may get harvested. So you have to be really on top of the specials to knock him down. It was a pretty fun fight, but you do have to respect that a counter is absolutely needed. This is one of those rare red hot, this could, totally stonewall you if you don't bring a counter. And even with a counter, it was pretty hard. So that's why he is spicy followed by extra hot. Now, Elsa, she's one of those champions that almost anybody can do. There is a sort of trick node on this one where you basically have to like parry her special 1 at the exact time. What I would recommend doing is duel Elsa Bloodstone a ton before this fight and get the timing down. As soon as you get the timing down for parrying those bullets on the special 1, there's really not much else going on in this fight. She is very ready to throw that thing. You just always have to be ready to do it. If you do not get the perfect block, it will be a bad time. That's all there is to the fight. It reminds me of Cyclops back in the Abyss. where it's a fight that like once you start practicing it, things go really well. If you don't have the ability to practice it, you get in a little bit of trouble. So if you don't practice it, it's definitely a spicy fight. But if you go into this fight with the timing down, it's only an orange fight and you don't really need a counter. Purgatory, there isn't much going on here. She gets all of her souls for all the different classes. Most of them don't matter. The one that does matter though is the mutant one, because it has something to do with you throwing a special and her stealing your remaining power. So it is possible to accidentally throw a special, and if she has too much power, she'll go red. You have to watch out for that mutant soul, but otherwise it's just regular Purgatory. I would practice baiting her special too. There's a way to do it with one swipe back so that even when it's unblockable, you don't get hit. If you do that, there really isn't much going on with this fight. If you bring a counter, if you bring a really strong science champion, I heard from DLL that Photon was perfect for her. If you bring a champion like that, it's going to make it even easier. But in my opinion, this is a pretty straightforward fight and kind of a breath of fresh air in the middle of this tricky section. Now, Quicksilver to me is kind of the typical orange fight. If you do bring a counter, you want somebody that can deal with his evade, in my opinion. So Kate Bishop, again, you can get the Tranquilize up and deal with the evade. Somebody like Shuri, she can actually deal with his evade because guaranteed crits will stop the evades on Quicksilver. So if you have either of them, to me, it's a pretty standard orange fight. He's just a big Quicksilver. Like all these other fights, there's things about him that will ramp more, and you have to deal with that trap node where occasionally he goes unblockable. If you're comfortable baiting the specials, it's an orange fight. If you're not comfortable baiting his specials, I think it's a spicy fight because he can be annoying. You do want to try to bring an evade counter, but even if you don't, a good damage dealer is going to be able to get it done. It just so happens that Kate and Shuri are both excellent for him, and since they're sort of like at the crux of this run, I don't think it's that difficult to fit a counter. That's why he's orange and orange. Now we get to the third little path here, starting with Mantis. Mantis is a little bit of a gimmick fight where you actually cannot do damage through conventional means. So you literally can use you could use a 2-star champion if you wanted. I mean, you would die from the enrage really fast, but you can basically use anybody. Pro tip, you actually don't want to use Aegon because part of this technique is hitting block and he goes unblockable. So just, this isn't like a stonewall for Aegon, but it's not a good fight for him. However, if you use any other champ, she goes between Intimidate and Infuriate stages. You have to basically, I think it's either hit her block or intercept her, kind of like she would do to you. I may have gotten that wrong, but basically just read the prompts. You do these actions, it does direct damage against her. Again, any champ will work, and it just kind of becomes you pray the AI is working in your favor, and you do the mini game and she goes down. Now, future Ant-Man, we got to talk about this guy. In my opinion, there are 0 counters in the game right now that will make this fight doable. Anybody that has Pierce doesn't really have the range to get him down and, you know, deal with the power drains. The only close counter that we have is Hulkling, and even with Hulkling, I don't see this fight happening in less than 4 revives. It is just a crappy fight. I think someday we will be getting some cosmic champion that will directly counter this fight and have the damage needed to get it down. But the nodes are just awful on this as it is. First of all, the trap node, which will occasionally drain your power if you're not doing the correct action at the right time. So, you know, going up against future Ant-Man and losing your power is a bad time because you do need to throw specials due to power detonate. Also, he gains armor more regularly than he normally would, which kind of stinks. And then the final thing is he basically, if you, there's something about your special one being deactivated if you intercept him. So essentially you want to intercept him to remove armors, but in doing so, you deactivate your specials. You can get your entire power drained. You need to worry about the power detonation. He's just a nightmare. This was my most expensive fight in terms of revives. I just decided not to bring a counter and to just completely unit man my way through it. It was not pretty. but I knew that was going to be the case. There just are not counters to this guy. Even if you have Hulkling, I think he's a really bad fight. And I'm just, the reason I even made him spicy for you need to bring a counter is that someday there may be a counter and you will need to bring it. But in the current state of the game, there really are no counters. He's just an absolutely awful fight. I would just recommend bringing in whoever does a lot of damage and just do as much damage as you can and then just revive and keep going. He's an awful fight. I hated that fight. For me personally, the most expensive fight. Respect the future Ant-Man. As always, like I've been saying, that one is rough. Next up, we have Kitty Pryde, and she does pretty much require a counter. Again, she kind of just does Kitty Pryde things at an accelerated level, and in the third phase of this fight, blocking can be a bad time as well. So you want to have, essentially, in my opinion, Guillotine 2099 is the way to go here. She doesn't crit, she has power control. The other thing to note about this fight is that cowardice doesn't work on her on this specific fight, so you can't just cheese it with Nimrod. I mean, maybe Iron Doom would work because he's got other ways to deal with her that's not just the cowardice. But yeah, overall, I think you really want Guillotine 2099 here. I know there's other options, but for me, by bringing her, it became just kind of an orange fight. There wasn't that much going on, so that's why this rating is here. I do think that a lot of tech champions play into the archetype of countering champions like Kitty Pryde. So while Guillotine 2099 was my go-to now, there are definitely other tech champions I'm not mentioning, and there probably will be in the future. So with her, she's definitely spicy, bring a counter, but if you do bring a counter, she's just a pretty medium fight. Now, Sandman, there were times that it went really well, and then there were times with the trap node that went really poorly. But overall, if you bring Kate Bishop, he's like a yellow or an orange fight, depending on the time you go. I have a video of him. I have a solo of him. There were other times where I didn't even come close to soloing because there were other trap nodes to deal with, and it was a bit of a pain. You do need to bring a counter because he will ramp to his unstable phase in no time. When you parry, when debuffs get put on you, and some other ways just from his normal kit, he gets the 20 in no time. So unless if you bring a dedicated unstoppable counter for unstable, or you bring tranquilize, you're gonna have a pretty tough time with him and just not find windows for damage. The other thing is guaranteed crits, or like lots of crits, will reduce those resistance stacks, but they still may eventually get to 20, and then he becomes unstable and bad things happen. So you got to respect this fight. There's a lot going on. On paper, it may not seem that bad, but they gave him a ton of ways to ramp up really quickly, and it can go bad in just a second. So do respect the fight. In my opinion, he is extra hot when it comes to needing a counter. If you have a counter and her name is Kate Bishop, it won't be that bad, except for that one trap node. So he's somewhere between the mild and medium, but yeah, do respect this fight. It is a little tricky. And then the final three fights I can kind of talk about together. They don't really require counters. I think for Null, you do want Absorbing Man. Just makes it way easier. Wiccan can work pretty well as well. But even them, they're going to, unless if it's Absorbing Man, who is the best counter there, you're just going to be taking damage into block. So when we get to that, let's start with Spidey Supreme. Spidey Supreme is similar to Mantis in that there's no way to do damage unless if you are proccing buffs on yourself. So you don't want to bring buff immune here. That's kind of counterintuitive, but you need to be able to make buffs, and then they each take off like 0.5% of health. So I think you have to do that like 200 times, and then he goes down. He does direct damage when you form buffs. So the easiest way to do it is to use your medium attacks and get the spider seal buffs, but there is a more nuanced way to do it where you are using dexterity as well. And if you're really fancy, you can hang out in your back corner, you can dex, you can parry, you can hit with a medium, and each one of those will basically give you 2 procs of the dex buff and 1 spider seal buff. So that will get him down a little bit faster. If you use tracking debuff on Kate, then you can still land mediums without him missing and build that way. In general, his specials are kind of annoying, and if you block the special too, it does a lot of direct damage. So there's a lot of room for error in this fight. It is difficult. It is really hard to solo, even though it is possible to solo, but literally any champ can work. So this is sort of the definition of mild when it comes to needing a counter, because the only champ that won't work is buff immune. Now Null, I started to hint at, his basic hits just like take away 5% of your health anytime you block. Fortunately, that doesn't happen with the specials, because I know a lot of people have trouble not blocking his specials, but it just makes the fight a huge drag. He's a tank, he does stuff to your combat power, there's reverse controls, his specials are annoying, his animations are annoying, he doesn't always throw his heavies when you want him to. There's a lot going on here. If you don't have Absorbing Man, this is definitely a red fight. With Absorbing Man, it's a little bit easier. But yeah, I used Wiccan, America Chavez, kind of just traded off with them, and they did okay. But he's definitely a spicy fight. You can get him down. There's nothing roadblocking you, but you're just going to have to revive. You're going to have to use potions because he's going to eat away at your health. It's kind of a lazy design in my opinion, but he does go down with Absorbing Man relatively easily if you can bring him, just due to the way those armor breaks ramp him up. And finally, Shocker. Shocker is just a big shocker. Like we've seen that theme before, but the big thing going for him is that true accuracy and true strike and all the true everything will not prevent him from auto blocking you. So normally Kate Bishop would be the bomb for this fight because all of her specials will land because of the true accuracy, but not so much the case here. So you really got to learn how to fight Shocker himself. The way to do that, when he gets over 50 of his Vibra Shock charges, you want to have him dash towards you and go unblockable and intercept that dash. So if you're Kate Bishop, you can't just freely be throwing your specials because they will get auto blocked. You need to be getting those backdraft intercepts from the corner. And then you throw on top of that the animations of this guy are so annoying and they're really difficult to punish. The special one, the dash back, is a little weird. He has this like crazy first light attack that always seems to catch me on dashbacks and from block and things like that. He's very, very annoying to fight. You don't necessarily need a counter. I think like your typical main clears will all work here. I think Kate works pretty well because of just that consistent cold snap damage, but you do need to get good at fighting Shocker. That's kind of the end of that one. So all right, everybody, we have made it to the end of this video. If you made it this far, I commend you for listening to me talk about this for so long. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I've said it many times, but Necropolis was my favorite piece of content ever released. There's so much going on with every fight. There's so much to study, so much to plan for, and I just absolutely loved it. I was really lucky that I had a lot of the great counters. I was even able to do it without Wong, but if I had him, it would have been even easier. Hopefully this is helpful. If I left stuff out, if you've got some opinions, if you've got some stuff to share about your experience with Necropolis, leave it in the comment section. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, share it with your alliance mates. We want to help as many people as we can get through Necropolis so that you can get those sweet rewards as fast as you can. And that's what this channel is all about, educating and talking about ways to get through the content with a smart strategy and with using the least amount of items and going through the least amount of pain as possible. So thanks for checking it out. I hope you have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next one.